This video is brought to you by Miniature Market. Thousands of board games, miniatures, and paints, discount prices at Miniature Market.
Hi everybody, welcome to this week's Painting 101. So what's going to happen this week? Well, we have a couple of wooden things that I told you guys to paint. I painted one black and one white like you'll see on the table. From there, we're going to show you a couple of things. How colors work. Why people prime a certain way. Now, we're not going to talk about primer. We're going to have a separate show for all that stuff. Today is just picking up a cheap brush with some cheap paint and just visually looking at some things. And I'm going to explain them as they happen. And like I said, and we are going to get to a place where you're going to feel comfortable, and then go to all these other great sites, check out what they do, and take the little things that I taught you, the little baby steps, and let them take you to the big steps, because they're a lot better than I'll ever be. I do things a certain way, enough to get you to a certain point, but after that point I can't take you to that next step. There's other people that are going to take you to that next step, and that's what Painting 101 is for. So, without further ado, why don't we head down to the table and take a look at what we're going to be doing this week. So here we are down at the table. So here's exactly what I'm going to show you. First of all, I'm going to use every cheap paint on the planet just for these examples. And like I told you that we were going to get just very simple wooden blocks. Now I have this little wooden guy here. And as you can see, he's painted totally white. Well, there's a reason for that. Then I have this almost like spool, okay? It's painted black. You're going to want to do the same thing, and all you're going to do is take your cheapo paints and just take your brush and put it over. But the thing that we're trying to learn is how paints work and why. We'll have a class and break down what paint is at one point, but as you can see, I just took some very simple red. And the thing I want to show you is why we prime. Now, we're not going to talk about priming, but we are looking at the two basic colors that you'll prime things in, white and black. And you can prime gray too, depending on what you're going for. But it's developing the vision to know why you want to paint prime something white. Having the vision to know why you want to prime something dark. I'm just going to take some of this simple paint, and it's a cheaper paint, true, but it's very effective for what we're going to be practicing. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and spread it around. Now, you should thin your paints, but we're not going to talk about thinning paints right now. All we're going to do is just take this guy and we're going to put the red in here. And as you can see, this is not a great paint, so your pigment isn't going to be as good as a better paint. Now, some of you that may have went out and bought the better paint, you're going to see that when you paint red on a white, it really comes out really bright. But let's see what happens when we take that same color and do it on black. What do we get? Well, you can see through, first of all, one point, and that's because oh, excuse me, but because we have a lesser type of paint. But the one thing that really stands out, by just taking our paint and moving it around, and this is what I want you to get used to, is just taking these cheap paints and learning how to just spread things out with your brush. And you can see how this really works out and how everything kind of just goes on. Now, if you look at these two colors, when this dries, we would put another coat on it. But if you look, this is a lot brighter. So having a white underneath makes things a lot brighter, where this red is a lot darker. It's a lot darker. And that comes into the point that not everything that you're going to paint you're going to want bright and bring out the brightness in colors. You know, not everybody's a Harvey Firestein and walks around with very bright colors. There are you know, especially when you're painting like monsters and stuff like that. They are not going to be walking around in red chiffon or anything like that. You're going to want dull colors. And by undercoating something black, it's going to make a world of difference. And let's do the same thing with blue. Now, I have a little container here, but you guys just may have a cup. So you're just going to want to clean out your brush like I'm doing right here. And you're going to get all the paint out and make sure you have yourself a little paper towel. I'm using a paper plate just to really do really simple things. Now, I used like a really cheap paint to do that. But this Americana is a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to shake this up and we're going to pour some out. Now, the paint I used before was really cheap. It was actually, it was a Craftsmart, I believe, and it wasn't as good. Here we're using a little bit better the Americana. The Americana is a lot better, but still a cheap paint. And we're using an ultramarine blue. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to see what the difference is here. So we're going to take our blue, and you can see it's going on pretty bright. And it's a bright blue. It's a darker blue, but bright. And the white just seeps through a bit. Again, this is a cheap paint, so we really can't get a good look at what things are. But going over with a second coat, yeah, we have streaks. And that's the thing that I really want you to work on, is just getting your strokes down. I'm using nice cheap brushes, and all we're trying to do is get a feel for the paint by moving the paint around. Alright? Now we'll talk about watering paints down, especially when you're using better paints like Games Workshop and great paints like Vallejo and Army Builder. They really go on pretty nice. And you can see I'm actually pulling some of it off because the paint is so cheap. But this may be some of the stuff that you went out and bought, and that's why I wanted you to do that, so you can work this on these blocks. Now, we're going to let that just sit aside, and we're going to do the same thing here with this blue. And we're going to go over, but do you see how much darker that is? It almost turns it purple in a way. And this is a perfect example of what I was talking about, where you just take this paint and you're moving around and you're just getting a feel. You don't want to glop it on. That's the one thing you don't want to do. You just want to make it nice and smooth, and you're going to learn how to do paint strokes here. Look how I'm doing. I'm just moving it around and really learning control with the brush. Flipping the brush over and just learning that control. Now you see how dark that blue is compared to this blue? Now this definitely needs a second coat. Of course that needs a second coat as well. But what I'm trying to prove again is that your colors really stand out with a white background and your colors dull down with a dark background. And that's why we do what we do. Now turning this over, there's another thing that I wanted to show you. Okay? And that is taking and mixing a couple of colors to bring out edges. And we have a couple of different brushes. I have a thinner brush here, and then of course I got this thick brush here. So if we take a little bit of white, and again, these aren't the greatest paints. So we're going to mix a color together. We're going to just take some white and black and we're going to make a gray. And we're just going to take and put a little here. And using the cheaper paint, you don't have to worry about how much you put in there. Let's shake this up a little bit. You always want to shake your paints. Always make sure you shake them real good. Now we're going to take our black and we're just going to put it right on top there. And I know what you're thinking, that's an awful lot of paint. But I'm going to use this brush just to mix it together. And voila, now all of a sudden we have a gray. And you can make the gray as dark as you want or as bright as you want. Maybe you want a little bit lighter gray. So all you do is just put a little bit more in here and experiment. Experiment. Go onto the internet and get a color wheel and experiment mixing colors, especially with these cheapo paints. You're not worried about how it looks. Maybe you want to see what a blue duck looks like. Maybe you want to see all kinds of different colors. What if I take red and blue? Maybe I make my own purples and I add a little white to it. Experiment working with the cheaper paints and making different colors with it. And one of the techniques that is very important is edging, all right, or tracing. Now, one of the most important techniques, and the reason we made this gray, is we have a black thing. Not all of everything has lights and shadows to it, and by tracing, it brings in lights and shadows. It's kind of like washes. Washes get into the recesses of things and darken things up and brighten things out, so it gives the appearance of shadows. Light does things. Not everything is in contrast. This looks white to the eye, but there's grays in there because there are shadows. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but this is whiter than right in the neck here, which looks gray. That's how things look in real life. Okay? And the beauty of it is trying to mimic it. And this is where a lot of times you can trace or dry brush, as we call it. Now, tracing is basically just taking a corner and taking your small brush, like we're taking this gray, and all I'm doing, and I'm not going to do this to perfection because I don't have my magnifying glasses on, but all I'm doing is following the line that's provided for me. Okay? And I'm giving some depth to that. Now all of a sudden the cylinder looks like when that dries, it's going to dry darker and it's going to give it a little bit of a line. Another way to do that is by dry brushing, and these are things that you can practice right now. And that's what I really want you to try to do, is tracing around a block. Remember I told you to get the blocks, do all the corners, or taking like this and then taking as much as the paint as you can off the brush. And these are skills that we're going to use later on, but they're most basic skills. And it's knowing how much paint to have on something. And by just taking, now if you have too much paint, what's going to happen? Well, not that, because that's doing exactly almost what we wanted to. But we do have just a little bit too much paint on there. And you want to know why? Because look underneath. See how we can see all the brush marks? All we want to do is get it so we can see those lines. And you can see I've taken almost all the paint off this time. And now all I'm trying to do is catch that line. Look what I'm doing here. It's better than tracing by just taking the edge of your brush and dry brushing that edge. Now we've created the illusion, okay, and given that black some depth. But by putting a line around it, we've given some depth. And then you could do the same thing and put the line in there. And we could do it here too. As you can see, all I'm doing is just taking that brush and bringing it around. And that's how we get edges and things like that. You'll see fingers and things like that with edges by just taking and bringing out that color and keeping the shadow in between. It brings depth to our creations. And you can see right there just that edge around. That's the one I painted, which is sloppy, but this one with the dry brush actually is a little bit better. It takes a while and some practice to get that. There's people that can just draw that by just taking the edge of their brush and going around. Or you could be sloppy and, oh, actually this is the part that I dry brushed, I'm sorry. But you see, I had too much paint on here, and then if you have too much paint, you're going to get that kind of mark. But if you take and you have the right amount of paint, which is virtually none, and you're not going to get those lines on there. And that's one of the things I want you guys to practice this week. So what are we learning here today? We're learning how colors and how paint vary, of course. We have our cheap paints, which is fine. We're going to talk more about in the future about watering things down. We're going to talk more about mixing colors. But having these cheapo paints that I asked you to go out and get, experiment. Color your world. Try different colors. Maybe you have one of these guys and say, well, I want to see a guy that's green. Well, what colors do I have to mix together to get green? You know, that kind of thought pattern. And just experiment. Add different colors into things. Just take, let me put some yellow and blue together. What am I going to get out of that? Well, get your mixing brush. Well, once you clean it off, of course, like I'm doing. And just have fun. That's the most important thing. Take these things and feel as if you have a control with your brushes. And just work your brushes. So we take these colors and we mix them together. Well, look. What do we get? Well, we got a type of shade of green. It's a darker green. By just taking yellow and blue, now all of a sudden you've made it a different type of color. Now what can I do with that color? Maybe I just want to paint his head or something. And I want to paint that green. Now I'm using really, really cheap paints only because I didn't want you guys to go through and I'm not going to use my good paints to mess around with. Always use your cheaper paints and just experiment so you get the feel. If you can paint with bad paints, you're going to have a lot easier time when we move on to the paint sets and do the good paints. Or if you have good paints and you just want to take a little bit and just experiment around with things, have fun with it. Try different colors. Try mixing different things. Try making different things with your paints. Maybe take a little more blue and say, wow, I wonder what will happen if I just take my cheap brush, because we told you to go get cheap brushes. And once we start mixing and messing around with some of this stuff, now I can go over and you can see once the first coat dries, the second coat goes on and all of a sudden it's darker. Darker, but it's cleaner. And that's what I'm talking about. Don't let it bunch up. Don't try to get as much of the brush lines as you can. And don't get discouraged when you see, oh wow, why is the white shining through? Well, number one, you have a cheaper paint. But what this cheaper paint's going to do, it's going to teach you how to work and how to cover things, because it's harder with the cheaper paint. The better pigments and the good paints are just going to teach you how much easier, and by spreading the cheap paint thin, you're going to learn a lot of things about really good paint, that it goes on easier, and you're going to learn a lot more. And you see how that, and by just taking and very lightly taking and practicing good up and down strokes, and you see that's coming together a lot better. And we could have done the same thing with the red, but we didn't. Where's the blue? See, the blue already. Now you go over this blue, and you can see now that we are getting that blue is becoming a very solid dark color. And it's very nice. See, you don't want that. You don't want a big sloppy mess here. But we're going to be talking a lot about this in the future. You want nice, even up and down strokes. Okay, practice on those blocks that I told you to get. Practice moving the brush. It's like tickling with a feather. Nice and easy strokes. That's all we want. And we'll get the end results. Again, we're doing things very, very, very basic. You see how nice and even that is? See how that all comes together? That's all we're trying to do. And when that dries, the green, try mixing some more green and see if you can duplicate it. Because what you're going to find out is that you're going to learn balance between mixing colors. Because you may take too much of this and mix it with too much of the yellow, and then you have a totally different green. then you can't go over the same thing. So you're going to learn balance. And those are the things that I want you to work on this week. And I think it's very important that we start at such a basic thing: outlining, good strokes on white surfaces, on dark surfaces, dry brushing, learning how to take paint off, mixing different colors, paint different things. And do me a favor, send me your work. Send me your work to novaprime860@hotmail.com. I look forward to seeing what you guys do and what you come up with the blocks or whatever wooden figures. You could just take a plain wooden square. I don't care what you do. Just show me the different colors you make, the different things that you paint, and how those colors all mesh together by just using the basic primary colors of the color chart. And have some fun, because you're going to learn a lot by this, and you're going to feel a little bit more confident once you start mixing, and you're going to have fun. Have your kids join in. Have some fun. So that's your assignment for this week. Next week we're going to learn some more things, but we're really going to start learning now. We're going to start really heading into different things and why we do different things, and we're eventually going to work our way up to a bunch of miniatures. So why don't we head on top, and I'll take it on out of here. Well, there you have it. So now you see how colors, and why we spray paint some things black, some things gray, some things white. You can see how certain colors pop on a white background and become brighter, and on a darker background get dulled down. Also, you learn that basically everything is just tracing. Taking a miniature is just almost like tracing. All you're doing is following the lines that you are given and putting and shading and making things come alive, making them feel 3D. And that by dry brushing and some of the other techniques we kind of went over a little bit, but we will have entire episodes about that. You should be able to feel comfortable picking up a brush, and if you practice on those blocks, on those anything that you have, and just practice moving paint. That's all you need to do, so you have that good feel and flow. And that's what it really comes down to: moving paint and feeling getting a feel for how it feels in your hand, and how much control, gaining that control, being the master of the paint, making the paint flow a way that works for you. So there you go. That's this week's Painting 101. Next week we've got another exciting show for you. I hope you'll be here as we cover all the basics and some advanced techniques, as well as some airbrushing in the future. This is going to be a long series. I hope you stay with me along the way and enjoy what I'm doing. Please put your comments and questions in the bottom right here. Until next time, I'm Rob Bourne. We'll see you soon.